Today's reading comes from Mark's Gospel and follows on from where we left last week. We were looking at the challenge that Jesus had with the teachers of the law, and in the example of Jesus' mother and brothers, that idea about who is part of the kingdom of heaven and who is the community of faithful people, which is more to do with what people do in the light of the knowledge of God's love for them more than their blood relations. Jesus then goes on in Mark's Gospel to begin a series of teachings which looks a little bit like Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. And we've had a couple of parables. Immediately before this one is the parable of the sower, which is told in Matthew as well as Luke, and a lamp under a bowl, about being evident in your faith and your outworkings of your faith. And now we have a unique parable, the parable of the growing seed, which is not to be confused with the sower, and the parable of the mustard seed, which is in Matthew and Luke. So this is Mark chapter 4, verses 26 to 34. Jesus went on to say, "The kingdom of God is like this. A man scatters seed in his field. He sleeps at night, is up and about during the day, and all the while the seeds are sprouting and growing, yet he does not know how it happens. The soil itself makes the plants grow and bear fruit. First the tender stalk appears, then the ear, and finally the ear full of corn. When the corn is ripe, the man starts cutting it with his sickle, because harvest time has come." "What shall we say the kingdom of God is like?" asked Jesus. "What parable shall we use to explain it? It is like this. A man takes a mustard seed, the smallest seed in the world, and plants it in the ground. After a while it grows up and becomes the biggest of all plants. It puts out such large branches that the birds come and make their nests in its shade." Jesus preached his message to the people, using many other parables like these. He told them as much as they could understand. He would not speak to them without using parables, but when he was alone with his disciples, he would explain everything to them. I love that last bit. When he was alone with his disciples, he would explain everything to them, because they didn't get it either, and they needed to be explained. We are such slow and dim-witted people, just to understand the spiritual truth rather than stay in this literal, physical plane, which is, forgivably, all we think exists. So the parable of the growing seed, unique. So two parables that start with the idea, what is the kingdom of God like? And in this first one, the farmer sows some seed, and then miraculously it grows. The farmer does nothing. Well, of course, that's not really true, is it? The farmer's going to be very busy getting rid of weeds, in our modern day agricultural setting, adding fertilizer, pesticides, keeping vermin away, all sorts of things. It's a very busy time. But the point is true, and you know this from your own gardens or plant pots. You put something in, it grows. Miraculously, stuff happens. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful parable for all people who work for the kingdom of God, trying to serve Jesus in their lives, trying to be an authentic disciple by witnessing unconditional love to everyone, to just let go. Because the acts of kindness and grace that one may try and do through God's grace need to then be given to God. Anyone who spends too much time in angst and worry about what's going to happen and all the rest of it, it's not our problem. It's not our concern. God's relationship with every person on this planet is already happening. It's already there. It's already in action, whether that person acknowledges it or not. And our part is to simply show the light. And if people notice that light, and they think, wow, that's really great, then God can start to work with that. Or rather, they themselves can start to uncover the way back to God, the God who made them and the God who is already in them. But if they don't, well, that's the way it is in their lives at the moment. And with the parable of the mustard seed, again, a tiny, tiny thing. Because again, I suppose for the first Christians that Mark's writing for, there is a sense that there was just this preacher and a small collection of people with him, and he was going around different parts of the area, talking and preaching and healing, of course. But this wasn't the massive overthrow of power like a mighty army, a king arriving with power and might. It's just a guy and a few other guys walking around, talking, healing, and preaching. And out of this tiny, tiny, tiny activity comes something that's big enough to embrace the whole world. And this has happened. And this is the way it is, isn't it? All these years later, people like you and I can talk about God in human form in the person of Jesus and celebrate that love that was born of Jesus' death and resurrection so many centuries later, all over the world. And that's incredible. In the days before the internet, in the days before mass communication, in the days when word of mouth was all we had. Incredible. And that's the kingdom of God. But back to last week, and where this reading takes us even further. Of course, the kingdom of God is not a place. It's not identified by people who wear a particular uniform. It's not a place that you can identify in any way other than adherence to the good news of Jesus. The good news being that everyone is made by God and everyone is loved by God. Everyone is accepted and pardoned and set free if they want to be. That God's love is there for everybody, everywhere. And if they come to hear about it, and if they find a way back to accept that in their lives and to understand their real place in the universe, then there is love and acceptance and peace and grace and strength, but not in physical terms. We're always talking here about a spiritual plane, a higher sense of being. For to simply be breathing and eating and sleeping is to be alive, but maybe not to truly live. Oh, there are loads of wonderful things in this world to enjoy, and nobody would want to suggest otherwise. And we believe in a God who created all these wonderful things and gave us this thing. This life is to be enjoyed. Every moment is to be treasured and relished. This is not an escapist, bizarre idea that we somehow live on a different plane all the time. But we are more than just animals. We are more than just people who satisfy our physical hunger or our physical desires. We're people who understand beauty and truth, people who experience love, given and received, people who understand that what's really important in life is connecting with other people and being there for them. Everyone in every situation, unless they're a completely closed off hermit or solitary prisoner, will understand that interaction with people is what we were made for. And there is a basic choice in our interactions with people. Are we going to be thinking of them primarily, or are we going to be thinking of ourselves primarily? And that's a fundamental decision. Jesus came and revealed God to those who saw him, and through his risen spirit to all of us who've heard about him through the experiences of other people, or through the words of the Bible, or through any other way in which we've encountered God in our lives. And we understand that love is there for us, and that love is available for all people. It's so important to be able to reflect that love to other people because we've been given this bigger vision of ourselves. And this is so helpful in so many situations, because to be self-consumed, either in times of great happiness, of course, or in times of great sadness and distress, is only half the story. Yes, we are our own physical bubble, our own little entity, but we exist in a bigger context. And it helps us. It's a great way of relieving stress and anxiety and worry and fear and doubt, to know that we're part of something bigger. And I think people can get that from creation, of course, because that's God's too, in terms of looking at the world or the universe or the beauties of nature and see that they are part of something bigger, whatever that may be. But for people who've encountered God in their lives, there is a very real sense of, well, yes, but we're also just held in the strong and loving arms of the God who made all this. And we are absolutely loved by that God. And that's tremendous good news. And so when we think about being a disciple and what the kingdom of God is like, it's always the same message. Somehow each one of us as a unique individual ideally needs to find our way back to God, needs to understand that we are God's, we were made by God, and every waking moment is entrusted to us by God. It's special, it's to be treasured, it's to be used for the best possible motivations, and those motivations are summed up in the Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. Both of those things mean getting ourself out of the way. Not that we don't matter, far from it. But true happiness comes in serving and loving and knowing that we made a difference, rather than simply being. And God's love inspires us to this. It's not a duty, something we have to do, but when you encounter God's love in your life, you want to do that. Because to have been given such an amazing gift of free love inspires that desire to share it with other people. And that's the kingdom of God.